Describe your initial connection with the survivor.
So first I read his story before I met him or had any emails with him at all. So he was used to telling his story. He does public speaking for youth, and he had also there were some historian PhDs who had interviewed him and transcribed the interview with him. So I did read an account of his survival story from beginning to end. And so even before I met him, I did start a little bit sketching and did start having visual ideas a little bit. But then I met him and I didn't speak to him at all before I met him. It was not me that approached him or made the introduction. They just brought us both together. And because for this project, they're trying to document everything, there was a full film crew the first time we met. So that was at my university. We met there and we had a meeting room there. And so the full film crew was there, and Charlotta, the editor, was there, and also a reporter for a local newspaper was there. So I would say the meeting was not the most natural, the first meeting, but still, like, I felt right away like I knew David. Like his voice and his accent did actually really remind me of my grandfather. And so, like, almost as soon as he said, "Hello, Miriam," that I just went to hug him. And luckily he was okay with it, and he hugged me too. And so I think that we had connection right away. Like, I think that we could kind of feel that we had some similarities. So the first meeting was about 2 hours, and he started to tell his story, and so some of it was the same as in the transcript I read, but some of it was new, and I was able to ask questions also while he was talking, and so I think that he led him to start going down a little bit different paths, I think he's a very visual thinker. So when I would ask him questions that were details about, how old were the other children in the other family, or, how big was the summer kitchen you lived in? So when I would ask him sort of visual things, then he would have answers that were things that I could use in my drawings.
So you almost answered the third question. Tell us about the experience of the co-creation with the survivor. So if there is something to add, you can add it.
Okay, so yes, there was 2 in-person meetings with David, and so far I've actually only met him in person twice, and it was like 2 days apart in the winter of 2020, January 2020. So the second meeting was at his home, but also there was a film crew there and other people. But I thought his home was very special. I learned that his wife, who is also a survivor, is a visual artist, and she does like giant expressionist paintings, really beautiful. And she showed me one that she said was about her survival experience, and it was an abstract, but you could really feel it. So again, like, I was impressed at that, and it seemed like he said, "I understand artists. I understand how artists work." And I think that was true. That was very helpful. He understood that my process was interpretation, not just translation, and that it's a new thing we are creating, rather than, just a retelling of his story. And I guess it was at the second meeting, I was a little bit making sketches, but I was kind of keeping my mind open about how this project would be and how I would depict it. But at that meeting, the newspaper reporter asked me right then, she's like, "How do you think you will depict this?" And so I was kind of put on the spot. And so then I said that I was sort of getting associations of almost like a fairy tale, like it feels like there's unseen forces that are acting on this family, because the soldiers are only present some of the time. They're not inside, a camp. They're not inside a structure. They're inside a forest, but there's threats all around. And like anything can be a danger, but anything can also be, a help or safety to them. So I thought that in that way, it kind of reminded me of some fairy tales, the dark forest. And I said, I was a little bit nervous to say that in front of David, because already some people who are not familiar with comics think it's for children or it's humorous. And I don't believe that comics, if they're for children, that's good. If they're humorous, that's good. But they can be many more things. And so I was a little bit afraid to say fairy tale also, because I was afraid that David would think, I don't think his story is serious. Like that I think it's just a light story. But no, he said he understood. He said he got that. And so after that meeting, we were supposed to have another meeting in March. So between January and March, I just kind of put it back in my mind a little bit. Didn't really communicate with him too much. In March, we were supposed to have another meeting, but then that was when everything shut down. So the meeting was canceled, but I had started to do some thumbnails. So in March, I started talking to him again, but just on the phone and by email. So I would email him some of my sketches and then I would call him on the phone and he would give me like some feedback and some thoughts and some, associations. So I feel like, as I said, he understood artistic process and he gave me a lot of freedom for me to choose, the arc of the story, like what would be the beginning, middle, and end, and what would be the themes that I was conveying. But when it came to visual details, he was very specific, and I liked that. I liked having that guidance. Like that, something that did not come up in his transcript at all, and something you might not know from him today, is that he had red hair as a child. So that was very important as an artist, and I was able to use his red hair as a motif, or a leitmotif, as you might say in German, that you can always see David on the page because he's the only one that has the red hair. And so details like that, I was very glad that he only brought those details after he saw my drawings, because he might not think of them if he's just reciting his story. So I would say that that's how our collaboration worked. And he said also, like, more memories came out when I was talking to him. So he said actually even seeing my sketches, he was kind of emotional for him. And then he would also tell me more things he was remembering based on seeing the sketches. Like, I have different pages where the family forages for different kinds of food. And so he was telling me all this stuff about, what they would find in the woods, what they would find in the fields, what they would barter with other people. And so we worked back and forth. So in some ways I feel like he gave me a lot of freedom, but I think he also gave me a lot of input.